This is a Dauntless Media Collective podcast. Visit dauntless.fm for more content.
TLC created a PR show for Gothard's teachings.
You've probably heard of the Duggar family.
Everyone knew who the family was. We were part of IBLP as early as I can remember.
The biggest feature of Bill Gothard's teachings is authority.
Kids obey the parents, wives obey their husbands. Everyone obeys Bill Gothard.
Gothard turned every father into a cult leader and every home into an island.
Hi, I'm Nate.
I'm Gail.
And this is Full Mutuality. So, joining us today is our good friend. You all know her, you all love her, Jessica Goforth. Welcome back to the Full Mutuality podcast.
Thank you. It is really, really good to be here. I feel like there should be like applause in the background or something.
Yeah, Nate's gonna add in the effect. This section.
Yeah.
People should be like,
Exactly. There we go. Welcome back, girl. Our fellow Dauntless Media podcaster. And on today's episode, we are titling this is a series we're doing, So Your Cult Was in a Documentary. And if you listen to the first one, Nate and Janice were going on about the Hillsong documentary, Hillsong NYC specifically. And today we are going to be covering the documentary. And which platform was it on? So it's
Amazon
called Shiny.
Prime.
Yeah.
Amazon Prime released a documentary. It's a docuseries. There's 3 of them, right? Does that count as a docuseries?
4.
Yes,
There's 4 episodes. Mm-hmm.
So
in the docuseries, yes,
called Shiny Happy People, and they were touching on Bill Gothard, ATI, IBLP. If you were completely clueless as you're tuning into this, you really need to go in our archives, look for our episode that we did with Jessica. I think it might be a 2-parter. I'm pretty sure it's a 2-parter, and you go through your own story. So we won't maybe get too much into that, but is there like a Cliff Notes version of like, you know, you want to give the short version of born and raised in this kind of thing and where, your background a little bit, short version before we get into the docuseries.
Yeah, in the very, very early 80s, when I was a very small child, my parents went to their first IBLP seminar, and the materials began to be in our home. So I was about 4 or 5. And from there, you know, our home life was pretty normal up until that point. And then we started getting involved in the homeschool community when I was starting school age, and then transitioned into homeschooling through Bill Gothard's new homeschool program called ATI, or Advanced Training Institute. And was in that all the way until I graduated from high school. So that's kind of the Cliff Notes version of my connection to it.
So check out our back episode. I heard you on Scott's on Chapel Probation giving your story too in detail. That's another one. If you guys want to hear more of Jessica, check that out. Go check that. So those are two places. And of course, you run a podcast called
I do.
Leaving the Village. Mm-hmm. You and Alexis together, your co-host. And so, I mean, I'm guessing coming up soon, you guys will be having a lot of interviews based on the docu-series that you guys just that just came out.
Yes.
I'm just curious, before we get into it, how many times have you watched it all the way through since it came out?
I watched it all the way through once, and then have skipped around a little bit more when doing it the other times. And so I've probably watched it a grand total of 4 or 5 times. And I've seen all of it, but not like straight through 5 times. But yes, lots and lots of stopping and starting, writing notes, taking breaks.
When you heard the project was coming out, I don't think there's been anything else on IBLP or ATI that's been that intense or that has done that much work on it. Like, I know Hillsong's got a few documentaries out there and things, but like, I don't think I've seen anything on it. So how did you feel knowing this was going to come out? Like knowing that this was going to be out there?
That's a really good question, because I think I started to hear there's been rumblings of people wanting to make a documentary about it for a while, and especially once the Duggars rose to fame, and then their entire world collapsed with scandal and, abuse and all of this. And I think that as that was happening, I remember thinking, there's got to be a documentary eventually about this, just because the Duggars are so big and everyone knows who they are, and the mainstream media is covering the scandals that they are having and their family imploding. And so I was curious when that would be or how that would go down. And then I began hearing about a year ago that a project was underway, and I really thought it would be something you could only see on YouTube. Like, I was thinking it was someone's project that you'd watch, and I thought it would be very interesting, and I thought it would be I figured there would be some triggers, like it would be some stuff it would bring up for me, but I also felt like I'd done a lot of work, and then I was really ready because I had done my own podcast for 2 years,
right,
almost 3 years at that point.
Discussing it.
Yeah, discussing it a lot. I'd done like 40 some episodes on it. I had grappled with a lot of feelings related to all of that and come out the other side, and I was like, yeah, like this is going to be so interesting. And then it was announced, and Amazon kept this really under wraps. I guess that's how they do things. I don't know, because I've never known anyone who was involved in projects like this. But once I got the word from one of my friends who was in it, he sent me a trailer, and I was like, oh my word, this is going to be big. This is going to be seen by people. It was just like, my family could watch this, my friends could stumble on this, maybe if it's on Amazon, and so that was a whole interesting experience of realizing this is actually going to be on Amazon. When I realized that was huge. Yeah. I could never, ever have predicted what ended up happening with its popularity. Never.
Before we get into that, there is something that you mentioned when it came to the Duggars that I find very interesting, and maybe it's just because it's breaking news, so it popped in my news feed today that Josh Duggar had appealed his jail sentence, and today I think there was a ruling today, and they rejected
today
it.
Or yesterday.
Good.
And yeah,
I'm nervous for a second.
Yeah, I think his appeal got thrown out. The judge just dismissed it out of hand.
Good.
Good news today. Yeah. But it's interesting when you mention how, the Duggar family basically, their influence within in terms of the media attention. It's so interesting because I think they had a big influence in popularizing IBLP and ATI in the sense of,
for sure.
Yeah, they had their TV
show.
No
one would know who it was otherwise.
Yeah, like they shone a light. They, from what I've heard from you, they were poster children in the movement, and their faces were used to draw in people to the movement. But it's interesting and ironic and sort of fitting that they're also the people who brought attention to the abuses and their downfall and their scandals within their story of being that popular TV show. 19 Kids and Counting. I forget. Maybe they were something else, and then they kept changing their name as they got more kids. But so people who I know who've never heard about, who don't know what ATI or IB, those letters don't mean anything to them. If I say the Duggars and TLC and 19 Kids, they're like, oh yeah. So it's so fascinating that they were the ones to draw in people into the movement, and then their spectacular crash got people interested in the abuses within the movement as well. Like it was like a catalyst for.
Yeah, I mean, it really was.
Their story is a big part of the docu series.
And some people are upset by that. Like when we draw parallels to other, like Hillsong, for example, by featuring Carl Lentz, it pulls away from the stories of the survivors. And while the Duggar family was definitely a vehicle for bringing people in and a part of the problem of ATI and IBLP, I really think that their story is the reason we know and we care. And so it was the fact that that Jill Duggar was willing to go on and be interviewed and sit there and tell her story, I think was really important. And I think centering them made sense. I don't really have a problem with that. There are people who do, but I don't. I don't think anyone would know or care or realize how pervasive IBLP was and how it went into every aspect of evangelicalism in the United States and in mission work around the world. They were very, very involved, and you wouldn't necessarily know that. And now you do.
Yeah.
And the Hillsong example is a good one because, like, not just Carl Lentz, but even like the Justin Bieber pastor.
Yeah.
Like when you bring up Justin Bieber, the people who've been in New York are sort of, they roll their eyes like, we just don't want to hear about you. Like, why does he come up in every documentary? It's because it was a celebrity culture church. And who were the celebrities? Who are the people that drew people to those crowds in those places? So yes, the celebrities, be it the Duggars or the Justin Biebers and Selena Gomez's or whoever, you know, in the different religious environments, show people like these are not just, you know, out in the country somewhere people.
Right.
They're known. They're people that have been on TV that millions of people watch or listen to or care about. And they bring an influence into these environments where people are attracted to it because of those people. So yeah,
for sure.
But it's true. I guess when you want to talk about the ordinary person who attended somewhere and was harmed, people want to give a platform and a floor to your ordinary survivors of those environments. So I'm curious if maybe I'm asking too big of a question because I did want to go through the details with you, but like if you had to rate it overall, were you overall satisfied with how the documentary came out? You're going to have to go on probably some tangents of explanation on what you think probably about it, or how did you feel overall with how they did?
Honestly, no. Like, I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was very well done. I thought they covered from the 1,000-foot view. Like, you know, if you're going to back way out and you're going to just say, okay, you know nothing, let me explain this to you. You've only heard of the Duggars and you don't know what religion they had. You thought they just went to a regular church. Let me help you out here. And I thought they did an amazing job of that. Could they have gone into a lot more detail? Oh my goodness, yes. Like,
there's so much to cover.
There's so much more. And I think that anybody who was really into free ginger or spent a lot of time on Reddit and already knew a lot about the Duggars found it disappointing because this stuff they already
knew. The basic things.
This is the very, very basic framework. They already knew the way IBLP worked and they already knew that it was kind of a culty thing. They already knew those things. But I don't think your average viewer who was scanning channels and saw an ad for 19 kids and counting and was like, whoa, there's like a lot of kids. That's crazy. Wow. You know, and kept scrolling and now knew that they had that in their head. They didn't think, I bet they're in a cult. I wonder what cult that is. I'm going to go Google that. And now they are looking at this documentary going, okay, I get you now. I thought it was very, very, very well done. And I thought they did well with the interviews that they did with the other survivors. I thought that they did a great job of who they picked to be on there, who they were able to draw in and chat with. I thought it was brilliant to talk to Kristen Dumais. I thought it was just really, really, really well done. I had very, very little critiques I could give it. So other than there's more.
Yeah.
And I feel like, I keep drawing the Hillsong comparisons in my head because as you're saying stuff, it reminds me of that because with Hillsong, I had a friend was saying like, especially the Discovery Plus one, they were like, I feel like they covered like stuff I already knew. And I was like, I felt like you. I felt like, well, that was, if you didn't know about Hillsong, they gave the bird's eye view and they really like helped someone who wasn't familiar to get the details. If you've watched a whole bunch of
that. Like I had been singing Hillsong church songs in my church since forever. And that's all I knew. I knew they had cool songs and that they were, I honestly didn't even realize they were in Australia, that's where they were based until more recently. So yeah, my understanding was very, very, very limited, and so watching that was helpful. It was very helpful.
And that's
Start
great.
with
Like
the basics.
it is different when you're in that culture and you know all that stuff, and then when you're an outsider to it and you don't know, having that big view is helpful. And obviously for the people who are in it, they want more details to come out. And with Hillsong, there has been more, and I feel like with Shiny Happy People, it did do the zoom out, and then it did start narrowing down on some of the stories, and I did really well from what I've heard. It was very, very well watched. It's gotten a lot of views. It stayed in the number 1 spot in the religion category for quite a long time.
And it was at number 1 of anything to watch on Amazon for over 2 weeks, which is huge. Big. Very few shows do that are big.
And then to think in the religion category on top of it, right? Like,
it's religious and it's a documentary. And so the there's lots of people that won't watch a documentary with a gun to their head. Like they have no interest in a documentary, and they watched this. I know people who don't watch Amazon at all. They don't have Prime, didn't need Prime, that needed Prime because they needed to see this. Yeah. And so that was amazing. I think that's one of the I think that's one of the records that it broke, is that it brought in more new Prime members than anything they had ever released before.
Well, when that happens on any platform, there's more. There's going to be some follow-ups, which I think is good for everybody.
Well, and there may be a season 2 where they drill down and go deeper. They already had lots of footage they didn't use, and they had other people willing to be interviewed that they didn't get a chance to sit down with. So there's a lot of talk at Amazon about a season 2 or another series 2 that they'll just
as somebody
build on it.
Who's been with IBLP very early on, like one of the earlier families in that sort of movement, and who knows the details and who's done podcast after podcast breaking down like so much things about it for people who don't know, who are the people that you would love if somebody was listening from there and being like, who are we missing, or what stories, or who should we interview? Who would you love to see? I know you have so many connections in that world. You probably don't even want to name names, but what stories do you feel like you'd love to hear told?
I won't name names because I don't want to put people like on blast or whatever, but on the spot. But I do think they really need to talk to people who did the children's institutes. They barely touched on children's institutes, but I feel like that was a huge indoctrination tool. And that would be really important. The other thing I think they really need to talk about is courtship. I think they need to have several people who have had courtships
to explain what that
IBLP sanctioned and, ordered courtships. I did as well. Although I'm not probably someone who could actually sit down and talk about that on camera, but because I haven't even talked about that on my podcast yet. But it's a very big piece. Another thing I think would be really important is to sit down and talk with some of the women who had reversals and then had babies, reversal babies. I know that men had vasectomies too, reversals too, but I think the tubal reversal
so much more
angle
invasive.
So much more invasive. It's so much more dangerous. And then there are women who went on to have 7, 8 more children afterwards. And that's a lot. I think it would be really helpful to talk up to some of the women who did that and what that was really like, the kind of pressure that they felt, that kind of thing. And I think that they need to dive in more on the music aspect and media. That I think people need to understand how fully they isolated all of us from access to any sort of mainstream or popular media of any sort.
Oh my goodness. Your story on Scott's podcast, and I won't get into too much detail about standing in like a Walmart and like trying to sneak in TV. I was just like, you really like kind of painted what cult world feels like and how freaky it is and how terrifying it is. Normal things become like huge paranoia things. And I won't get into that, but like go check out that episode. It was the media
and so
stuff.
But it wasn't just like a don't do this. There was such an extensive amount of paraphernalia that they put out, propaganda that they put out related to rock and roll music, related to rock beats, like even contemporary Christian music was very, very, very bad. There was a lot of racism encoded. There were a lot of dog whistles in there that were related to racism, and it's I think that would be really good to cover more thoroughly. And they also really didn't cover the race aspect. I think we need some people of color interviewed so that you can really understand. Oh, and definitely the homophobic and transphobic side of all of that. So there are a lot of LGBTQ survivors that we need several of them to be represented. So that's the people I think need to be heard from.
That's a good thorough analysis. I appreciate that. Again, Hillsong's coming into my head because when we saw the Discovery Plus, one of my first criticisms was they did not touch on homophobia. They didn't touch on racism. Like those were like and the worst part is the people they interviewed, like Janice and Noemi, that was their, we knew their stories and we were like, how did you have Janice say 3 sentences and that's it? Like you, if you know her story, you're like, she can tell you about the racism going on. And Noemi was like, I was horrified to, like, she gave her story on our podcast. It's like, you guys did not cover the important stuff. Yeah. But in the recent one,
harrowing story.
Yes,
it's one of those kinds of stories that you sit there thinking, this needs to get out. How did they not tell this story?
But these are themes inside evangelicalism, whether it's homophobia and racism, that often don't get told when they focus. And maybe it's because it's such a part of the culture in many different ways that it doesn't even seem, it's like a lot of places have this in common. But I was glad that the follow-up, like the last one that came out, there was problems with it. Won't get into all that. We were talking before we started recording and discussing because you had watched it, but that was maybe
watched it the other day.
Yeah, that was maybe one of the good parts, in my opinion, was they at least touched. And Janice gave a lot more of her story.
She did.
But when you were talking too about the beats, the rock beats and contemporary Christian music and the problems with it, and even courtship, all those things, I was thinking like that stuff, Nate and you. I mean, we talked about it on our last episode when we were doing our collaboration on Chris's, about you and Nate were just chatting in the beginning about how you had that some similarities in common from I think you call it your redheaded stepsister or something like that of the fundamentalist or Bob Jones kind of world.
Yeah,
it really, I think. What would be great about covering those topics is, sure, they're IBLP, sure, they're ATI. And what I find fascinating is mainstream evangelicals are not even aware of how so much of those teachings have filtered in, like the umbrella of authority. Everyone has seen that picture, don't know where it came from, but that's from IBLP and Bill Gothard. And then when we get into things like, courtship, or when we get into, the whole, what is it called? Having all the many babies. Sorry, the
Quiverful.
word. Quiverful. That's it. The Quiverful movement. When it comes to rock beats, when it comes to music and CCM being evil, those are things that I think are far reaching enough that they go out, they extend into the fundamentalist world beyond just IBLP. So I think it's helpful for people to listen and be like, oh, even though I wasn't in this cult, it was adjacent, or I recognize these elements or these teachings, and hearing about those things can be really healing, I think, even beyond just...
Yes. And I think people have to understand that, like, IBLP was not a church. It was not a religion. You didn't convert to it. They didn't set out to have you leave your church and join their church. That was not how it worked. It was
sort of a recruitment tool, like stay in your churches and bring more people into ATI, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was 100% that. And that's what it's hard for people to understand, because they'll be like, so what was the church you were involved in? And I'm like, I went to your church, not your church, but I went to your church.
Yeah.
And we all did. Everybody that was in ATI went to a mainstream evangelical church in their community or a fundamentalist church in their community.
Yeah, Nate that was remembers some ATI families at his church.
Yeah, and the my perspective on some of that is, you have the people who were in ATI who were part of IBLP who were in fundamentalist churches versus mainstream evangelical churches. I get the impression, and this is simply me speculating, but I do get this impression that the families that stuck to fundamentalist churches were really buying into the cloister yourself off, separate as much as possible. They tied in, they like applied every aspect of the doctrine of biblical separation as much as they possibly could. Whereas the families who went into mainstream evangelical churches, they were probably trying to spread the message of IBLP and ATI.
Better way to do it.
Yeah, because in fundamentalist churches, those pastors are preaching those kinds of messages, right? They're getting stuff handed to them from Bob Jones and Hyles Anderson, and that's all stuff that's like right in line with what the kinds of things that Bill Gothard is teaching.
Yeah.
But mainstream evangelicalism isn't, and yet those families are all in those churches spreading those messages, getting the word out there about these things. And like you were just saying, Gail, those images are getting passed around and finding their way into mainstream evangelical thought.
Right.
Hey, I'm Ramsey from Montreal, listening to Full Mutuality on my way to work.
Hey everyone, I'm Jessica from the Leaving the Village podcast. I wanted to take a moment to say thank you for tuning into this show. We're so grateful that you've decided to spend your time with us. Seriously, Dan, Gail, Kathleen, Nate, Scott, and the rest of us here at the Dauntless Media Collective couldn't produce content like the show you're listening to without your support. I'd also like to invite you even further into the conversation. Right now, there are some great discussions happening over in the Dauntless Media Collective Discord server. If you're interested in chatting with other folks who are deconstructing and decolonizing the oppressive traditions they came from, please feel free to hop onto the server. If you don't know what Discord is, it's a place where communities can gather online for chatting on a wide variety of topics. In our Discord server, we have channels devoted to general deconstruction conversations, some meme sharing, therapeutic venting about whatever religious bullshit you're currently dealing with, and even a channel specifically devoted to talking about the latest episode of the podcast you're listening to right now. I hope you'll join us. You can log in directly to the Dauntless server by clicking on the link in the show notes or heading to dauntless.fm and clicking on the link in the top banner. See you there.
You were mentioning courtship. Fucking Josh Harris.
You know, exactly.
He wasn't limited to ATI curriculum. He got out there.
Yeah.
You know?
Was he from an ATI family, or he was just adjacent to them? I'm curious. Josh
I
Harris.
think they were just adjacent. I don't think that Josh was just a little bit younger than me. So my parents were in the same circles with his parents, and we lived on opposite sides of the country because they were, West Coast and we were East Coast. But the homeschool circuit, when you go to homeschool curriculum fairs and all these book fairs and things, my parents were at those all of the time. We traveled all over for that. My parents sold books for a while for homeschool curriculum, not ATI books, but like, conservative Christian homeschool things. And so my parents knew the Harrises quite well. I don't remember meeting Josh ever, but we were all in the same world, right?
For those,
all the same world. It's just different. Like some families used ATI's curriculum, but if their family had any desire for their children to have an actual education, they would not have chosen ATI. It's not an education, as I've covered extensively on my
You guys have gone through the school modules and shown what education looked like. But going back to Josh Harris, for anybody who's listening and is like, who's Josh Harris? Because sometimes we assume everyone knows the Christian lingo in the world.
Right.
He wrote a really popular book in the 90s called I Kissed Dating Goodbye, which I read, sadly.
Oh, yeah.
And I bought it too as a teenager and wanted to follow that and wanted to change how I dated in order to start over.
I was already married. I had already done my courtship at that point. But almost word for word the way they did it, the way he prescribed it.
So his follow-up book from I Kissed Dating Goodbye was about courtship. Boy Meets Girl. And it was really like digging into that. That's the model in order. Yeah. So when you talked earlier,
of following his courtship with his then, future wife.
Yeah.
Who has written a book recently or is about to release her book, which will be interesting.
I am so excited to read that book.
As am I.
Isn't it called The Woman They Wanted?
I think so. Yeah.
Or The Wife They Wanted? I think it's The Woman They Wanted. It looks fucking brilliant. I cannot wait.
Yeah, we're so used to hearing the boys' voices on all of these things. And often we don't hear the stories from the people who were the marginalized people in those communities. And when it comes to fundamentalism, especially, and when it comes to courtship, like hearing the voices of women is so critical to understanding the impact, to understanding the pain being caused. And patriarchy hurts men too. And I strongly believe that, I believe feminism's for everyone for that reason, because it actually sets out to harm men. But how it harms men and women is different. You know, how patriarchal environments specifically marginalize women. Hearing from the women becomes a really important part of these stories. So, yeah, definitely. I sort of want to take things a little chronologically, because, you know, it talked about how, you know, you'd heard this was coming out and you thought it would maybe be something on YouTube, and then you heard it was going to be. So I want to kind of just go through your journey with the documentary and be like, okay, you saw a trailer. How did you feel with just a trailer dropping? What was that like for you?
That was crazy. I had just sat down. I work from home. I'm an accountant too, and I work from home. So I was sitting at my desk and early in the morning, and I get a message, and it's just like, it's here. And then there's a link to the trailer. And I clicked on it without even thinking. Like, I didn't, just like, curious, here we go. And I hit play, and immediately it's, first of all, it's a really well done trailer. And I couldn't, no words. I don't know how many years it had been since I had seen Bill Gothard's face on a screen and heard his voice at the same time. And I was surprised how viscerally that hit me. And I finished the whole thing, and I just sat there, and I was like, I need words. I need a word. Any word. And I had none. And I literally could not. I just wrote him back, I don't have words. Wow.
And the person who sent you the link to
the
it?
guy who sent me the link. And within hours, my phone was blowing up, you know, and I had watched it over and over and over and over again. And every time I felt like I'd been knocked back on my ass. I just could not get over the impact of it. And it felt like a physical hit of memory, of sensory overload, of just like, I was there. I was in that room. I heard him say those words. I know that person. I know that person. And I just kept thinking, we fucking did it. You know, we fucking did it. And as the days went by, words finally came, and I had more of an ability to say something, and I shared it on my Facebook, and everyone was talking about it. But again, I thought that my view was skewed, right? Like, so I'm like, okay, yeah, of course my news feed is full of this because most of my friends are from this world, you know, or are interested in this world, you know, of deconstructing and leaving evangelicalism. And so I thought, okay, you know, yes, it's of interest to everyone who's deconstructed in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, of course there's buzz around it. And then I started seeing articles from mainstream media outlets, you know, plugging it and talking about it. And I was like, this is crazy. And then I started planning my entire week around its release coming out on Thursday
How long
night.
from when the trailer released to the documentary?
That's the wild thing. It was like 4 days or something.
It was really
very short.
I remember watching the trailer and being like, it looked great. I was like, yeah, this looks like it's going to be a powerful one. I have a question before I kind of want to follow through to how the documentary impacted you. But before I get there, I wanted to ask, was there, you don't name names on this question, but like, was there people in your life, because you do a podcast addressing this topic, addressing your past, addressing what you came out of. Have there been people in your life who are kind of like, Jessica, I think you overblow how bad the whole thing was. Like, I think you kind of blow it into something way bigger than it was. It was, you know, maybe people have some nostalgia towards it. Or have you had those conversations where people sort of think you're a drama queen and you're going on way too much about this or drawing way too much attention to this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, before the documentary came out, you mean?
Yes.
Yes.
Specifically
always.
before it came out.
Yeah, there were always people that were kind of like, she kind of, you know how you get that sense from people that are like, she says she was in a cult, but I've never heard of it. So, like, that's weird. And they kind of don't know what to say. And you can kind of see that look on their face where they're like, because I never really made a secret of it, even before I started the podcast. If I sat down and got to know someone new and they were asking, like, where'd you go to school or college or whatever? I didn't go to college.
Remember this show from the 80s or 90s? Yeah. Nope.
I grew up in a freaking cult because I wasn't allowed to go to college. So, you know, like, it was one of those things that I kind of didn't, because at some point you either lie and be like, I didn't want to go to college, or you tell the truth and say, I would have loved to have gone to college. I was not allowed to go to college because I was raised in a world where people didn't go to college. Girls didn't go to college specifically, but in a religious organization that didn't believe in going to college. Wait, what kind of religious organization? And so then it just became easier to say it was a cult, you know? And yeah, that's kind of a shocking word too. And people would be like, wait, what? So I think there were a lot of people that were like, yeah, so Jessica was raised in a cult. You know, with this like, you know, and they didn't say it mean to my face because I don't have mean friends and don't want to imply that. But like, it just was one of those things that just didn't land, right? It just didn't seem to land with a lot of people. And then there are people who I was close to who I don't have a choice about being close to, who felt like we should have moved on by now. You know, why are you still bringing this up? It was 30 years ago. Move on now. You know, like, live your life. You're not in a cult now. You wear whatever you want to wear now. You watch whatever you want to watch now. You listen to whatever fucking music you want to hear. Like, just stop talking about this as if you're some sort of, you know, damaged person. You're fine. You're great. You get to do whatever you want now. Move on. And that was definitely there in my life too before this came out.
And I asked the question because I think this ties into how a documentary could end up impacting somebody who's lived through this. But I did want to add some thoughts on that because, like, that attitude that you just described, I think a lot of people who are listening, whether they're coming out of evangelicalism, those kind of comments are so typical and common. Yeah. And sometimes they come from other people who've even been through the same thing as you, where you're expecting maybe an outsider would be like, get over this. But sometimes
they're like, I grew up in it too, you know?
Yes. Yeah. Sometimes the people who are a part of it, maybe, and this is my theory, I think the more traumatized you were on some levels and the more you run from it, the more you don't want anyone else to talk about it. Like, remember having this conversation.
How you've been harmed, if you were harmed, and some people did come out the other side unharmed, at least as far as they would say, you know. They feel like my experience is valid too, you know. Right. I'm okay. I feel fine. And some of them even went through bad things and are like, yeah, that was not cool. But I'm fine now. Like, I have my own life. I'm good. It's all good.
But like, it's interesting when you, so if I just want to flesh this out, but if, you know, let's say you overall didn't have the same experiences as somebody else. Let's say I went through a church and someone else went through my church and we came out and my experience was positive and theirs was negative. I think I wouldn't feel upset that they're talking about their story. I'd be like, oh, I didn't know about this. Can you tell me more? I'm going to learn the stuff I didn't know in my experience where it was easy. I want to know the other details that were, you know, foreign to me so that I can be more aware. But I think when people are just like, shh, stop talking about this. It doesn't need to be talked about anymore. Please move on. That's kind of an indication or something telling of something deep in terms of someone trying to perhaps avoid dealing with. I remember hearing someone say to someone else, like, that didn't happen. That experience didn't happen. And they were being joking about the whole thing. Like, they weren't serious that it didn't happen, but it was their own way of just saying, I am not ready to ever visit those places again, think about those places again. Like, total avoidance is my coping mechanism. And so I think when people start talking, it kind of stirs up the reality that even if your experience was better than someone else's, actually it might even be harder to listen to be like, well, I didn't come out of this.
I think
and
it
I
really
felt
is.
positive about
Yeah.
it. And now I have to
Yeah.
face that it was super damaging to so many people.
Mhm.
Like,
And
on a
I
wide
think the
scale.
people who really did internalize what happened to them and what they went through as, for the most part, a good experience or a fun thing or a just a unique way of growing up. I mean, some people feel like it was like a unique experience and they then caught up later and, they took the good and discarded the bad, and it's like, whatever, and they are offended because they feel like it means that they don't get to take the good stuff that they took with them. They don't get to have that. Nobody's telling them that. Nobody's telling you can't have your good stuff. Like, I have relationships there's no way I would have had otherwise, unless I'd been and cherished relationships. And connected in a deeper way because we went through things together that you wouldn't go through, normally. And I cherish those people and those friendships. I do have a unique ability to empathize with oppression in a way that the average middle-class white woman wouldn't have, I'm not saying it's the same as being, having to deal with racism or homophobia or transphobia or that kind of thing. I'm not trying to say that it's the same, but there's an understanding, a level of understanding of disenfranchisement that I do grasp better than I think your average middle class.
Well, and to your credit, and I'll compare me coming from Canada and you living in Texas. To your credit, like my culture is secular, and a lot of my values and beliefs have come from the beliefs around me, teaching about equality. Christians have not, evangelicals have not taken over those spheres. No. Whereas in Texas, you walk down the street and everyone's like, "What church do you go to?" And you walk into a store and it's Bible verses and worship songs in the background. And that's everywhere. So to come everywhere. So where you live, if we share the exact same beliefs, where I live, run of the mill, it's not interesting or impressive. Where you live, you are a radical, left-wing, liberal. Yeah. You're just destroying the country with your liberalism. Like, it's a big freaking deal. So like I think looking at people in different contexts gives you a clue of what they like when you're sorry, just to your credit, when you were talking about your unique ability to empathize with oppressed people, if for people who might think, well, maybe Jessica, you're tooting your own horn. Worth tooting. You live in Texas and you have beliefs that go against your entire society, culture, family, like the people around you, all around you, you stand out like a sore thumb because it is not the norm. So it takes a lot more introspection. It takes a lot more questioning. It takes a lot more seeking answers to come to those conclusions in an environment that's giving you the opposite messaging to that, right? Like continuously feeding you the opposite. So I just wanted to back you up for those listening and be like, Jessica's not full of herself. I actually know her. She's a friend. And
but
here's
also,
some stuff.
I think there's something to be said for having lived in certain spaces and been subjected to certain types of attacks, harassment,
high control.
High control environments that gives you maybe not the ability to like fully recognize what someone is going through, but when you can recognize when something wrong is happening.
Right.
You can recognize when someone is being oppressed, and you can take a stand and you can step into those places and look at the scenario through that lens with those eyes and say, something's not right here. I need to stand on behalf of the poor, the marginalized, the oppressed in this scenario. Not because I am in this scenario, but because I was in another scenario and I recognize when someone else is being harmed.
Right. And what I was, one of the things I tried to explain to someone who I had dinner with recently, and I was explaining to them, I was like, you don't understand, like, we in America today and in Canada, you think of feminists talking about patriarchy, and that word is usually only invoked by people who are saying it negatively. That's the only people you hear use the word patriarchy, right? No. I grew
in the
up
US
with that word. I grew up with that word being used positively. We need to have patriarchal households.
Oh,
it was
I see what you're saying.
literally taught to us that using that word as the model that God has designed. And this, at that point, in the 80s, there was obviously the feminist enclave of people who were constantly fighting the patriarchy. I never bumped into a single solitary person who ever used that word in a feminist light. Never. I never met one person
was a
like that.
positive term.
Yes.
I mean, I've heard in evangelical circles, feminism referred to as like a derogatory word.
Oh yeah, we always feminazis and all that stuff because we listened to Rush Limbaugh
which is
too.
Yeah,
terrible.
So we got all that from him. But yes, feminism.
I don't think I heard anyone
horrible.
call out patriarchy as a positive in my evangelical.
No, it was,
that was very
openly
common.
taught. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
In
it's very common
fundamentalist
in
circles.
IFB circles as well.
To be like, this is God's model.
Yeah. They refer to patriarchy as the original patriarchs of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and following in their footsteps, and I even feel like there was a Bob Jones song that was like something about the patriarchs.
Yeah. I'm in the patriarchy. No, that's a different song.
Fits. But and like referring to the structure of households as patriarchy and as the way God designed it and positively, like I just can't stress that enough. I can't explain it, I don't think, quite adequately, what that sounded like and what it was like to sit in a room and hear that and internalize it so fully. And so then realize when you as a woman are not given agency, you're not given. When I remember being explained way back the first time someone tried to explain affirmative action to me. And I was just like, I don't get it. Like, why can't you just, apply to the same schools and get in? And I didn't understand until I turned it around and sat down with this and realized, Jessica, do you know how to go buy your own house? Do you know how to do these things and these things? Do you have a path to get onto the on-ramp of corporate America? No, you don't know where that path is. It's not there for you. Someone has to make a path because I am not aware of it because of the way I was raised and the world I was raised in. If you don't have an on-ramp, if you don't create one for people who aren't in the spaces that these spaces were already created for, right? So like these major universities are created for the rich, the wealthy, the privileged young people who are already in these schools that have an on-ramp to these universities, right? The ramp is already there for them. The only way to get people on there to there from somewhere else is to create another on-ramp. And I think that that's what, when I finally realized that I myself was missing on-ramps that the typical American woman had because I was intentionally kept on a different road. And then when you back up from that and you realize that America was literally set up and intentionally boxed in certain races of people so that they did not have access to those on-ramps that the privileged could use to go to these places. Like when I realized all of this, oh my gosh, all of it made sense because I also was stuck in a spot without an on-ramp for certain things that the average American woman had. And what do you do when you don't have the on-ramp? Where do you go from there? If you don't have it, if you don't know it's there, somebody telling you, well, you could just go do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think there's there's important things in the stuff you're saying about, these places were created for certain people. I think Americans don't like to acknowledge that certain institutions, most institutions were created, like the history of them, right? What was the police force made for?
Right.
Which schools allowed black people to, they didn't. They were created for white, like teachers even say these schools were created for rich white people is not, it's just the erasing of history that happens to not start there. And then if you do acknowledge it, then you have to be like, yeah, but then it'll change. As soon as Black people, everything just changed. It just flipped overnight, and now everyone can have equal opportunity. And what you're getting into is just a reality that switch doesn't flip that way. That's not how that works. If no one else before you has done it, if other people have not gotten into these spaces, it doesn't work like that. That is, it has to be actively pursued and sought in ways that understand the limits and that understand how these structures are designed to keep people out, and that actively work against those structures that have been built to keep out certain people. Yeah. So, yeah.
And so that's what I meant. I didn't mean to say that I had special insight or something. But I think that going through living like this, living in a cloistered, segregated, separated off, not segregated, but separated off, world causes you to not be able to access what everybody else can access. And I still struggle with that today. I'm 45, I'm divorced. I am in the workforce for the first time in my life, and in a full-time capacity. For the first time in my life. I mean, like that's big.
Yeah.
Like figuring out how you present yourself, how you come up with a resume, how you even explain away all these years, the lack of education, the fact that I've never entered a school, except for little short periods of time. This is very, very, very difficult way to start life, to try to do life. And so, anyway.
So this is actually very helpful because it kind of ties into some things that I was thinking about, of like, why should any of this matter? Why, like, if you haven't seen the documentary series, if you haven't watched Shiny Happy
why
People,
bother?
Yeah, exactly. Why bother with this? Anyway, IBLP, ATI, they're gone anyway. They don't exist as organizations. What's the point? Well, there are a couple things that I think are worth taking note of. What you just mentioned in how difficult it is to get to where you are. I think you probably would say this yourself, but you're very fortunate to be in your position, given the roadblocks that were in front of you, given the fact that you didn't have a work history at your age, that you didn't have a legitimate high school diploma from a recognized institution, that you didn't get a bachelor's degree from a recognized accredited institution. Those are all roadblocks that you have. And I think it's worth people taking notice that this exists in this country a lot more often than we realize.
Yes.
There are people whose roadblocks are kept secret because they're in these cults that are extremely secretive. But there are also people who have roadblocks for obvious smack in the face reasons that we just refuse to recognize, like the systemic roadblocks that are placed in front of certain racial groups in this country.
Right.
Those exist, and I think it's important for us to recognize that. It's important for us as people, and as, if you're listening to this and you have any hiring and firing power, if you work in HR, if you're, if you're looking at resumes and you see weird gaps and you're wondering, what's that about? Maybe it's worth calling that person and bringing them in for an interview to find out what their story is. Because I think we're all made up of all kinds of, we're all made up of all kinds of stories that can contribute to environments more than most people realize. And I think it's worth having even a modicum of compassion and not just looking at somebody like, I don't think they'll be able to function in this environment because they're missing X, Y, and Z on their CV or resume.
I remember when I'm actually incredibly curious, eager to learn, easy to teach things, because I'm getting to learn things for the first time ever. But I also bring the wisdom and age that I have, the years of, of growing and healing and working on myself. I think that there are a lot of us who have recovered from and have been in recovery from IBLP and ATI and the stuff, who are a tremendous asset to the to the work environments that we work in. And
yeah.
100%. I remember having this conversation with a teacher because I had to get off my school trajectory when I was young and I had kids, and then I stopped school. And then when I was thinking of going back, I was like, people are going to look at that. And my teachers were like, just reminding me like, hey, mature students are taken as your life experience actually counts. Like, not just your education. If you finish your program and you're 23, that's one thing. But if you're coming back to school as a 30-year-old, for example, you have that life experience makes you come into learning with like a richness. And I remember getting that speech and how helpful it was and healing it was for me. And as you're talking about what you bring to the table, I think, people who've survived some cults, some really traumatic experiences, who haven't taken the regular path through things, but have a ton of life experience and have had to work through therapy and healing and examining all kinds of stuff and pushing past all kinds of fears and challenges and indoctrination. I mean, these are people, that come with a lot of expertise in different areas. That's not learned. Yeah. It's on the ground. It's field work.
Yeah. They're not sitting and learning this in a classroom. They're learning it.
Yeah. It's not textbook. It's field work.
The other thing that that I wanted to bring up as a sort of response to why should I care, these organizations don't stop just because they cease to exist in any organized capacity or institutional capacity. They continue to have influence at individual levels, where those of us who have been through these kinds of spaces are talking to our therapists constantly, are having to do some serious work in order to heal from those environments. And there are, evangelical Christianity makes up like
a third of
a third of our population in the US. So and if that's the case, then this growing trend of people who are leaving evangelical Christianity, we're all in some kind of recovery pattern, and we all have a lot of, and those marks and those scars are still with us and will continue to be with us, and we're going to pass them on, whether we like it or not. We're going to pass those on to our children, and they're going to have to work through it in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, for sure.
And on the those institutions, even after they disappear, they leave their marks on our society at a governmental institutional level, at a systemic level. I think of my own alma mater and the things that my alma mater is responsible for in American society. That
part.
The segregation academies, the types of the whole private Christian school movement. The people that founded my school were all involved in that, and the charter schools in the U.S. This attitude of keeping kids out of the public school system. To what end?
That's because still alive and well in the U.S.
Yeah.
It's a good conversation. It's an important conversation, and I think we're going to go in a lot of directions.
Yeah. So to wrap that part up, just to say, why should I care? Why should I watch this documentary series? This is why.
Yes.
Because it has influence day to day and will continue to have influence in the future.
What is it you wanted me to reconcile myself to? I was born here almost 60 years ago. I'm not going to live another 60 years. You always told me it takes time. It has taken my father's time, my mother's time, my uncle's time, my brother's and my sister's time, my nieces and my nephew's time. How much time do you want for your progress?
I hate you naturally. And I hate black people. Things are going to get worse before they get better.
What is presented to me as an American does not look like me.
Because you're not allowed to be a black man in corporate America.
You give us a hard time for being white, being American, and being in control.
And when you live under a situation like that constantly, and then you ask me, whether I approve of violence. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, there's a lot of crazy stuff happening right now. And you know what? We need a space where we can debrief some of it and deconstruct. If you've been looking for a POC-centered podcast that engages with intersectionality, religion, critical race theory, and some hip-hop culture, then you need to check out Profane Faith. I'll be your host, Daniel Whitehodge, and we go in every other week. So check us out wherever you find your podcasts, or check us out at whitehodgepodcasts.com to see what other platforms we're on. Cool? All right. Peace.
And I loved how they brought that around when you get to the fourth episode.
The end. Yes, the
they
last episode.
really pulled that all around into a really good place at the end where you had to sit with it. You really had to just realize, okay, there's stuff here, and I'm consuming it, and I am furthering it. And one of the things, one of my friends called me, and she was in tears after she watched it. And she goes, I mean, I wasn't a fan of the Duggars show. Like, I didn't watch all the time or anything. She said, I saw enough and I found it entertaining. Like, I was entertained. She said, but now I really have to sit with my complicity in these children's abuse. And she said, after watching this documentary, she said, I cannot stop thinking we should have, people watching this show should have been calling CPS, not being entertained. And I was like, yeah. She's like, we should have seen it. It was right there. It was right there.
I mean, I absolutely love the fourth episode emphasizing the political ramifications and tying into what you were saying, Nate, about, you know, how it applies to our society today and how these institutions, you know, they still exist. And I mean, maybe just looking outside of all of this as a Canadian, you know, you have Trump, who's causing all kinds of chaos as president. He leaves office, but before he does, he makes sure to honor the evangelicals' foot soldier requests, because they've been working at this for years and years, and it's why they voted for him, to ban abortion. That's been their passion. That's been why they vote why they have a single voter issue that keeps them going no matter what other things are going on. And now Trump is gone, but he's managed to change the Supreme Court. He's managed to get people on board that are in line with this, that the evangelicals wanted. And then he leaves office, and Biden is currently in office, and they have managed to overturn that protection. And so looking at it and seeing how it's a long game, and seeing how they do train foot soldiers. They train people to be political arms that actually alter the course of women's lives. People, women who have, you know, who are going to go into sepsis because their babies are dead inside of them, or their pregnancy is not viable, and they need an abort, like they need it. And if they don't, they will die. But now the doctor says, well, you won't die today, so I can't legally get away with doing the abortion today, because the clause now in my state is that I have to wait, and I can only do this if your life is in danger. It will come to that, but not at this moment. So you're going to wait this out, and your life is going to be in jeopardy because this rule has been overturned in the Supreme Court, and now the states have made up their own, you know, and how many people have, like, I've heard story after story, and it's disgusting and it's horrifying. And this is something, I don't know how you guys all feel, but for me as a Canadian, it's shocking. Like, it's absolutely shocking that this has happened in the U.S.
So when Roe v. Wade was overturned, shortly after, I remember hearing on the news certain doctors' practices closing up because there were doctors who just couldn't ethically continue their practices any longer, and they were like, "Well, we're leaving." There were some that were trying to hold on, but they were deathly afraid of being sued by the state government, or being arrested, or what have you, for performing an abortion, any sort of care procedure that is necessary.
Yeah.
And so now, these sorts of things have far-reaching consequences, right? Like, so I'm thinking, well, what does that mean for the medical system in the U.S., in these states in particular, right? If there are women's care practices that are just closing up shop because they can't ethically continue to practice medicine any longer under those new laws in those states. Doctors are just like, you know what? I can't work here. Let me go work in a state that I can work in. So what does that mean for the women who live in that state, right? I think
Right.
Governor Murphy, good on Governor Murphy for making, New Jersey a safe haven state for women who want to get abortions. But what does that mean for women who can't afford to leave their home state and travel to New Jersey?
Yeah,
because it's
New
not
Jersey's
like
a long fucking way from Texas.
It is. It is.
Not next door.
Yeah. So what? Like, and the only women who are, I'm not the only, but the majority of women who are going to come to New Jersey and get an abortion are women who have the money to travel that far.
Right.
Yeah.
Which again,
privilege already.
This is the thing that has been repeated over and over and over again, is that the people who have the privilege to access abortion, which is all of these politicians and
their
mistresses, they will not be impacted. Who will be impacted are the people who are already barely able to feed the children that they have. This is what makes me so angry about the Sound of Freedom movie.
Oh my God.
Is that we want to be all concerned about children that are being exploited and abused, and yet the policies that these exact same people are supporting is the exact way that children become perfectly positioned to be trafficked.
I mean, and it's fascinating because one of the executive producers of Sound of Freedom, you have to Google it, look up his name. I'm not going to do it for you. But basically, he was a 30-year-old youth pastor when he got in a relationship with a 15-year-old who's his current wife.
I just want to make this all very, very clear because, somebody is going to say, oh, that's not accurate, and blah, blah, blah. Right. So he was a youth pastor who was over 30, who one of the girls in his youth group, who I think might have been 15 or 16 at the time.
She was 15.
She was 15 at the time. He began to groom her. He
made her break up with her.
Right.
He made her break up with her boyfriend. And even on her Instagram, when she describes how she got together with him, it's like she was forced. And that word was used in her talking about her own relationship with him. So and here's the guy who's making this movie on child trafficking. And then, it sounds like we're side tangenting, but no, this is actually a problem in the US, and how these culty movements, these fundamentalist movements, how that ties in with their foot soldier stuff. So,
And
everyone go watch Sound of...
is the way. Forced birth is the way you have children that are not able to be cared for. So you have poor families who are having children they cannot care for. I'm not saying they're bad people. I'm saying that they already knew they couldn't care for more children. They're stuck with more children who end up in situations where they cannot be supervised and watched, and they end up trafficked. This is the pipeline to it. It is not the Christian kids who are the family that has one kid and they're in the grocery store. Their little blonde-haired, blue-eyed baby is not being scooped up out of the Walmart parking lot cart as their mother is putting her groceries in and trafficked. That is not what is happening.
Right.
It's not what is happening.
The other
what is happening is that forced birth children are being trafficked.
The other thing that drives me nuts is the fact that these, pro-forced birth advocates are also anti-comprehensive sex education.
Yes, exactly.
So
which is the other thing we know very well prevents unwanted pregnancy.
Exactly.
And of the 10 states that have banned child brides, only 10 American states, which is a fifth of the U.S., have states. Only 10 is one of those 10 states. Actually, are all 10 states Republican? No. Is half of those states Republican? No. Is one of those 10 banning child bride states Republican? One. Just one out of those. No. None. Absolutely no state of those 10 who have banned child marriages. If you care about groomers, if you're going to yell about drag queens and say you care about protecting children, and go watch The Sound of Freedom, we care. You're not going to fight your own state to ban child marriages?
Yep.
Yes.
I'm going to
What
list.
does that
I'm gonna
actually
list them
say?
out right
yeah,
now.
list them out.
So because if your state is not one of these 10, you should be calling your state legislatures.
Yep.
Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Rhode Island, New York, Massachusetts, Vermont, Connecticut, and Michigan. If your state is
That's
not
it.
in that list, then
You can have child marriages.
yeah, you have no business going on about, oh, watch The Sound of Freedom. We really need to care
Go watch
about
it. We're actually making a difference. No, you're not. Go
No, you're
go
Yeah.
push legislature through that doesn't allow children to be forced into marriages.
Yes.
Start there. And also, when you think of people who care about grooming and say this kind of stuff, like things like taking away statute of limitations on people being able to report abusers. That is a fantastic, there are local ways. There are practical ways in order to protect children, to protect abuse victims, to actually care about grooming. And if we're not doing that, I'm sorry, but going to watch a movie, that actually skews it in a way that doesn't cut, like a lot of people who have been studying sex trafficking, children being brought into this, have written stuff out there to explain what the damage a movie does when it romanticizes and has, and I'm not saying it makes it look good, but puts an angle on it that maybe feels more comfortable versus the stuff that's right in front of you, like child marriages, like things that you can actually practically do, right?
The other thing is the number of, I think I saw a number the other day of children that we have dug up out of the ground in the 6,000 or 7,000 to this point that we have dug up in mass graves that were trafficked by the church. The church was the original inventor of all of this in the U.S.
And Canada.
And Canada.
Yeah.
They were trafficking these children in the exact ways that we're supposed to be calling it out.
Yeah.
And nobody is wants to hold the church accountable. Nobody wants to get the reparations that these families deserve, or even the cost of burial or anything. Nothing.
Right.
But hey, you watched a movie and you felt moved.
Yeah.
So you're making a difference in the world.
Sorry. Big tangent. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm happy with this tangent.
No, me
These are
too.
important topics. They're relevant. They're current. They're important.
We're over here.
This is
railing
where the
against,
rubber meets.
Yeah.
This is where the rubber meets the road.
We're over here railing against going and watching a movie, and we're telling you go watch a documentary series. No, but I think there's something to be said for doing the work, right? Going and watching a movie is easy. Watching a documentary series is probably almost as easy, but there's a little bit more work that gets involved with a documentary because it does tend to open people's minds to asking difficult questions, going down those rabbit trails, starting to read and research in those, the things that documentary series is talking about. So, I mean, there's just a handful, but I think it's important to point them out, and I think these are great starting points. The one we're talking about today, Shiny Happy People. And even though I don't really recommend the documentary itself, but I do recommend that you go into this world and add this documentary to your list of documentaries. But The Secrets of Hillsong, Hillsong, a Megachurch Exposed, God Forbid, which is the one about Jerry Falwell Jr. and Liberty University.
Yeah, that was good too.
Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey.
Ooh, that one hit me hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Vow. And more. Like, I'm not over here just
Under the Banner of Heaven. We can go on.
Under the Banner of Heaven. It's not a documentary series, but it is a docudrama.
But it gets into the history of really historical stuff with the Mormon Church, which is super helpful if you're an ex-Mormon.
So I think these are all good places to start and to do some work. And go find podcasts, Leaving the Village being one of them, Leaving Hillsong another. These podcasts that are touching on these cults where abuses are taking place and are digging into them, right? So like once you've started learning through watching a documentary, go one step further. Listen to stories of survivors. Go find groups that are advocating on behalf of survivors. an organization like Grace, Boz Chavidzian's organization, we've talked about them before, that are doing work specifically about protecting people and advocating for abuse survivors in religious institutions.
Yeah.
This is important stuff because it has a bearing on, honestly, I hate to be like paint too big a picture, but I don't think I can. I think it does have a bearing on the future of American society.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really does. I
And
think
go hire one. Go hire someone who survived this. Go pick their resume out of a pile that they mention their little bit of their crazy world that they grew up in, and give them a job. There's a lot of these people that are really struggling to get their feet under them, and a lot of it is financial disenfranchisement. It is imposed impoverishment, and a lot of them are very intelligent people with a lot to give. So yeah, go hire somebody.
Yeah.
You want to get your boots on the ground.
Yeah.
Jessica,
and
would
if
you mind?
Sorry, real quick. If you are a survivor of a cult or a religiously oppressive environment, and like Gail has mentioned in the past, when we say cult, because like you all were saying, you too, Jess, cult can be a tough word for people to wrap their minds around because it's so cult. But really, what we're talking about are environments that have a high degree of control over your mental life, your emotional life, your spiritual life, and the information that you take in and out, right? So if you come from any one of those environments, if you feel safe, if you feel comfortable, if you're in a place that you feel like you can do this without bringing more harm upon yourself, share your stories, share them with us. We have a Discord server where you can share your story with some relative anonymity and privacy, or if you want to go public with it, start a blog, write your story, post something on Facebook, share that with us, or don't. You don't have to, but I think we would all love to hear from you, and to find out what's because this stuff is so pervasive.
It really is.
It has taken over so many people's lives around this country. So.
You're giving me a segue into something I've been just sitting here waiting to ask Jessica. But the whole sharing your story, and we want to, and the power of that. Earlier I was saying to you, what if people's reaction? Have you had those kind of, maybe it wasn't that extreme, Jessica, maybe you're exaggerating, but you talk a lot about this. Why don't you move on? So I thought I was trying to set you up for this when I asked, what did you think about the trailer? Okay, documentary gets released.
Yeah.
How does that hit you? Having that story told, having that, I want to get back to Shiny Happy People for other people who have probably been in your shoes. What was that like for you to watch the movie? How did it hit you?
It was rough. I had gone out to Target, and I was in Target, and I wanted to get some. This was released in June, like the first week of June, like June 2nd, I think, June 1st. And I'm in the store, and I'm like, it's Pride Month. Like, I want some Pride stuff. No, I do not identify as LGBTQ, but I love celebrating my incredible LGBTQ friends. And so I was like, I just really wanted to go to Target and buy Pride stuff, and I couldn't find anything. And I was so upset. So I'm putz around Target. I finally find, because I live in a very, very conservative area, I finally found it. It was back in the back by the lingerie. And it was like in the middle, like tucked back in there. And so I finally find it, and I find this bottle of wine. It's like a Prosecco, and it's like all stripy, with all the rainbow on it. So I grabbed that, and as I'm picking this up, I get a call from a friend, and she's like, the documentary dropped. And I thought it was dropping the next day. So I was like, oh my gosh, okay. So I rush home. So I sat down with my Prosecco, my bottle of Prosecco, and I sucked that stuff down when I was watching this documentary. It was rough watching. The first episode knocked me for a loop, and then the second episode laid me out flat. I think the second episode is probably the hardest episode for anyone to watch. Most of the people that I talked to were like, ooh, the second episode left me needing a break. I was like, yeah.
That was the one that dealt more with the child abuse side of things, correct?
And the spanking and stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really rough, but I didn't want to stop, and I kept going, and I finished it all by midnight that night, around 1:00 in the morning. And I was crying at that point and really, really emotional, a little tipsy. And I slept very fitfully. I had a lot of nightmares that I hadn't had in a long, long time. I was surprised by it. I ended up journaling quite a bit of like what the nightmares were, because I was trying to make sense of why it came up for me that way. A lot of it was being imprisoned, being silenced, unable to make any noise, unable to scream or cry, unable to speak for myself. It was very, very, very visceral. It was an incredibly emotional experience. And I had tried to, podcast some and record all, and none of it was useful, because I was pretty much with my hands, like I'm doing this for the camera, but like you can't see me, but like I had my hands up by my mouth and my fingers like in my teeth, like just the whole last part of it. Like I just could barely emote. So over the next few days, there were a lot of us talking. And then I think what was just amazing for me was the reaction. The number of people that were like, I watched that, and they contacted me and were like, oh my God. Like, oh my God, what am I watching? What is this? Jessica, you lived this? And I'm like, yeah. And this is kind of barely scratching the surface. I told you. And they're like, no. This is
unreal.
A whole other level than what I was expecting. And that was very gratifying. That was very, very gratifying experience. I had one friend that literally texted me all throughout watching it. Like every few minutes, she'd be like, what did I just watch? What was that? What? Oh, there was a little boy on a screen being fake spanked on a stage. What is that? And I was like, yeah, I was in the room for that. I remember that happening. Wait. What? You saw that happen in the room? Yes, I did. I was there in that room.
I find there's a part of me when I saw that scene.
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff that was talked about.
That was a really hard one.
It was so hard to watch, but there was a part of me that thought, am I like decent? Why am I not like shocked and horrified? Is there is something
there was
in
an
me
aspect
broken?
of it that you're like, yep, I know what that's like.
Yeah.
This was such a
Like,
normal part of the teaching in these environments that it's like,
with
it's not brand new to you.
Mm-hmm.
To the people who are outside, you're like, what the F am I? Like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
And then if you're in it, you're like, actually, this was such a common teaching that like, there's a piece of me that's numb to all of this.
I think coming out of the Bob Jones world,
yeah,
I started recognizing that there were certain things that I was saying were completely normal and people were just shocked and horrified by.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of thing being one of them. I remember Jim Berg's wife coming during our freshman orientation class and talking to the girls in the class and saying, okay, when you bring your child home from the hospital, you must break their spirit. So the moment they start crying, you have to slap them. You have to spank them. You have to, and this isn't like, she's not saying this is, not violence. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about breaking their, the flesh, the Satan is working within this child. So you have to break their spirit. Like I remember this as one of the lectures in class. And I remember sitting there feeling like that's uncomfortable because my parents didn't do that.
Right.
I mean, unfortunately, my parents did subscribe to some of the spanking methodology that was being taught. I'm very grateful that they never read the Pearls book, even though I do remember seeing the Pearls book in my church library growing up. But yeah, it's yeah, so I think there was a part of me that just felt like, is there something wrong with me? Like I'm not so viscerally reacting to this that I'm sort of having this, it's painful, it's hard to watch, but I'm also like,
I think that the thing that I reacted to was I'm sitting on my couch in my house going back in time. I'm being thrust back into time to being 13, 14, something like that, sitting in a conference watching this, and then my brain realizing I'm watching mainstream media on my TV that my neighbor next door is probably watching too. And this is crazy. Like, I think
you weren't even allowed having a TV when you were at that thing.
Right.
And now you're sitting watching it, and your neighbor probably beside you who wasn't in that environment could be watching it.
And
too.
I'm processing it through their eyes, right? In a very strange way. And I think it's only because I was being thrown back to being in that room and feeling uncomfortable. Because if you can imagine watching it on TV, it was even much more uncomfortable in the room. I remember being like, oh shoot, this is really bothering me, and not having any vocabulary for that or being able to say anything. I'd like to chat with my dad about it because I feel like this particular session was mostly pitched towards fathers, and I don't think I was supposed to be in there. I think I was in there. I'm trying to remember. I need to ask him because I was really young, but I do remember being in there. And I remember, it's so funny how our memories work. It's just like how you have this feeling of like, should we leave? Like I have this vague feeling like wondering if we should leave and not be in the room. It felt very voyeuristic almost to watch something like that. And that is the way it's presented, because you're like, what? You're going to watch this man have...
And no one jumped up on the stage and yeah, like and then the kid hugs him at the end.
Right.
Like his mother hands this child over. Anyway, I just had a lot of feelings about that. It was very, very difficult. But there's a lot of aspects of the whole thing. So as people began to, because at first it was just all of us that were like ready. Like all of us who had been in ATI were like poised, ready to watch this and sit down and watch it. And we all did, those of us that knew we were going to. There's definitely a whole group of ATI people that are like, and I'm not watching that. Like, because they knew it was going to be too much for them. But there were a ton of us that were just like ready to watch. So we did. And then we were all talking. And then the days go by, and now people that have no connection to our ATI past are watching it too. And they're talking about it, and they're writing. And then celebrities that I follow, or like major writers and authors, not celebrities, but like major, are writing about it and posting about it and putting it in their stories and on social media. And I'm just like, holy shit, Jen Hatmaker just watched this thing and told everybody to go watch it. Like that. I still have a hard time having words for that and what it meant to me. To feel seen, to feel listened to feel heard. It's like someone saying, let me pull up a chair. All right, tell me your story. And that's what it felt like to me. It felt like a huge amount of the American public sat down and said, let me listen to your story.
That is powerful.
It was powerful.
Wow.
I think when you talk about, just when you talk about, and Nate, you were talking about like, am I broken? That I'm, that I just what I went through and what was normal. And Jessica, when you talk about people messaging you and being like, what the fuck was I just watching? Did that? No. And like, giving you the play-by-play, it reminds me of, for my own story, growing up in an abusive foster home, and there was so much violence and it was so extreme. Everything was so extreme that, people get into telling their stories. and then you start talking about yours, and then you quickly watch the faces of everyone around you change, and you're like, oh, I don't have a normal story, and I'm the awkward one kind of shifting the whole mood here by giving mine. And and then but the other side to that is, for myself, watching other people be horrified by my background was helpful to me in healing. I don't know if you feel this, Jessica, but like the stuff that became so normalized that you almost become distanced from it. Like, yeah, that's bad. But you don't, when other people are like, no, that's not bad. That's bad. Like, that's really, really,
that's a lot of bad.
Yeah. Because when you lived it and it was your normal,
that's not bad. That's messed up.
Yeah, if you wanted to cope and survive a horrible environment, you had to numb out in some way, shape, or form. You had to cut off pieces. You had to numb out to some stuff.
And your normal is your normal. Right. I don't know how our human brains work that way. If this is what's normal to you, then that is what's normal to you.
It's hard to know it's not normal because it is your normal.
It is your normal.
So hearing people respond to an extreme scenario that you lived through that was your normal helps you to have a perspective of how not normal it is and how horrifying it was. And so it's not just validating, like they're pulling up a chair and seeing you, but also people are helping balance out how much you've had to overcome. Exactly how
we do self-gaslight too. Like there is a sense in which I will be like, I have these feelings in my body and they're awful. But it can't be that awful. Like, why am I like this? I'm a big whiner, I guess. I'm a big baby who can't handle shit. Like, I just must be real overly sensitive or something. And we have these narratives going on in our head. And then someone else goes, how are you breathing? How do you get out of bed in the morning? I can't believe you get out of bed every day after what you went through. It is okay. Okay. All right. I'm not crazy. I'm not overly sensitive.
I
am not this, shrinking violet or, delicate
broken
flower
thing that's just so stuck all the time.
No, I'm actually been through legit bad stuff. And it's understandable that life is harder for me. It's just some things that should seem simple are not. Some things that should be doable aren't. And just having a few people understand that means a lot.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
It helps you not feel so crazy.
Yeah.
And on that note, quick. Sorry, Nate.
Sorry.
Can I go? Just added one last thought.
Go for it.
I was going to say, for people who are unpacking religious trauma or adverse religious experiences or whatever titles make you feel comfortable, but when you've gone through stuff that makes your body feel ick, I know the whole pressure to move on and get over it is one that you'll get thrown at you a lot from different people. I started going through, I did some therapy classes. I did some, but group therapy classes with licensed professional.
Yeah, and just
support groups.
just so you're aware, it's non-clinical.
Right. But it's run by people who are clinical therapists. But it's a group therapy, like it's a group environment of processing. And one of my thoughts was, well, as I, process through things, it's going to get easier. Like it's going to feel less, I have less rage and anger. And the reason I want to share this is for people where it's gone the other way. Because for me, it went the other way. The more I heard the context of what my experience wasn't unique. The things that I had gone through that were terrible were not an isolated, I just had a bad experience. No. This is tied to a bigger system of patriarchy, a bigger system of abuse, and like someone else is sharing their story and I'm like, and then someone else jumps in and everything is tying together. And you're sort of seeing the magnitude of these teachings and how the different ways they play out. And I have found the further away I get from my religious trauma, the more obviously horrible it becomes bigger and bigger, actually, with time. It doesn't get smaller. It gets bigger because that distance helps me to put things into perspective the further away from it I get. So it actually becomes more like I go, wow, like the more time goes by, the more all that sounds more bizarre, more awful. And that's not what I was expecting. I thought healing, and a lot of people talk about deconstruction and healing like something you just one day you just get out of bed and it just doesn't matter anymore. It's just fine. And for the people where they're like, this is still affecting me. Actually, this is still impacting me. Actually, I've gotten angrier. Is there something wrong with me? Am I headed in the wrong direction? I want to say no.
No,
you might actually be doing a lot more work unpacking things. And this is why it's getting you more upset.
Yeah.
Because you're becoming more aware. You're becoming
It's
a
that
lot
recognition. Yeah, the recognition of the pain.
Honoring your anger, honoring your experience, honoring your harm is huge.
Yeah.
It's really, really, really fucking huge.
Absolutely. So we are way, way past time. I do want to I would love to continue the conversation. I think I'm going to do that a little bit differently. So for now, we're going to sign off here. Mm-hmm. But if you are not currently a Patreon supporter and you want to hear a little bit more, we're going to have a little fun, off-the-cuff conversation over on Patreon.
Ooh,
so
I love
go
that.
ahead and sign up for that, and you could become a partner for.
We don't throw enough to our Patreons. We gotta give it. And Jessica's a good one.
Exactly. And so yeah, sign up for our Patreon. You can become a partner of our podcast for just $5 a month, and you get to hear additional conversations. We also have like a 3-hour video that we did with Noemi and Janice that's up there on the Patreon as well. So if you want to unlock all the good stuff, head over to patreon.com. We will always make our main content and our most important content available for free. That is what we do. But some of them more like,
we need to pay bills, guys. We pay. Podcast does not make us rich.
Nope.
We pay out more than we get.
Exactly. So we'd love your support. And so head over to patreon.com/fullmutuality to sign up. And over there.
Thank you to our current Patreons. We appreciate everyone.
Yes, we've got a handful of patrons over there, and we're so thankful for everything that you are giving to us. And so here, if you are a patron, you're going to hear this the rest of this conversation, which is really just more off the cuff, random stuff that we're going to talk about. But for those of you who are not, this is it for today. We've been talking for quite a while. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Full Mutuality Podcast. We're so glad you decided to join us today.
If you haven't already, please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Spotify, and pretty much every other podcast app. Just search for Full Mutuality on your app of choice, or visit our website, fullmutuality.com, for links to all of the apps that you can subscribe to us on.
And if you enjoyed what you've heard, we'd love it if you could leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on our website. A quick review is one of the best ways you can support us.
Speaking of support, you can also partner with us on Patreon. For just $5 US a month, you'll be helping us produce this podcast, and you'll get access to other content, such as exclusive episodes, access to occasional live-streamed recording sessions, and more. Just head over to patreon.com/fullmutuality to sign up.
Thanks again for hanging out with us today, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Full Mutuality Podcast.
This is a Dauntless Media Collective podcast. Visit dauntless.fm for more content.